By Republican member of Congress from Florida, Corey Mills, who serves on the House Foreign Affairs and Armed Services Committees. Congressman, thank you for taking the time to talk to us. Obviously, some pivotal days ahead, a lot of different views within your own party and disagreements on this bill and piece of legislation. And we'll put Medicaid aside for a second, but I do want to ask you about the issue of state and local taxes, because you do owe some of your majority thanks to Republicans who have won vulnerable seats in recent elections in Democratic states that do have higher state and local taxes. And they are arguing that they are in jeopardy of losing those seats if the cap to SALT is not raised. I believe now it's debated at around $60,000. You are in the school of thought that the cap should not be raised. I'm wondering, what do you say to your Republicans from those vulnerable districts that say, to you, we helped get you to the majority. Please don't leave us hanging. What is your response to them?
Well, again, this is really on the blue states like New York who continue to try and increase taxes. And I think that the constituency and the citizens of New York should be doing better to elect governors and to elect those who are actually physically conservative and understand that increasing taxes, you're not going to be able to try and somehow increase taxes to offset all of their overall debt. And I certainly don't think that great states like we have under Governor DeSantis in the state of Florida should be paying for those who are in higher tax states. I mean, we have about 900 New Yorkers a day who come to New York. I joke that when I talk to a New Yorker, I just act that they're an actual future constituent, give them 6 months. But, the reality is that we can't cut our way to prosperity in this. We can't cut our way to an actual GDP to national debt offset. We have to grow our way out of this. An economic growth strategy and ability like the REINS Act to help with permit reform, to help small businesses with market liquidity and capital is the way that we're going to do this. Now, I agree full-heartedly with the president. The tax cuts are necessary. We cannot allow the Tax Cut Jobs Act to sunset. That would take businesses from a 21% to a 43.4% increase. That's devastating for businesses, not to mention the amount of jobs that they would have to cut. So that actually resulted, believe it or not, in $5 trillion in federal revenue, which is the highest we've ever seen. So for all the Democrats who are saying that this is a tax cut for the rich, I would ask them to go look at what our federal revenue had increased to, because if it wasn't at $5 trillion, our $36 trillion deficit would be even higher. So there's a lot to talk through. But again, I support the president's agenda. I support the America First agenda for innovation and for rebuilding the nation economically. But I think we have to do it in a smart way that doesn't grow our debt too fiercely.
So on the issue of raising SALT caps, you are still a definitive no?
I think that we need to be able to negotiate it. I wouldn't vote for a $60,000 increase to every single Floridian. I think that there's something that could be negotiated, but for me, I think that's far too high to saddle the Floridians with a SALT tax that's going to help to offset, blue states who just should be basically doing better.
So just in terms of Speaker Johnson's strategy, I mean, obviously, you're in favor of the tax cuts, but of course, a lot of Republicans are concerned about what it means for the federal deficit. What is going to be the right strategy for Speaker Johnson to win over some of the deficit hawks here?
Well, I think the easiest way to offset the deficit hawks and the fiscal hawks is to go ahead and say, look, here's what we're going to grow with our GDP to offset the national debt ratio. Here's how we're going to invert that ratio through economic growth strategies. We're going to grow at a 2.5%, 3.5% rate. We're going to look at cutting $1 trillion thanks to DOGE and the waste, fraud, and abuse that's going on. We're going to look to basically have a savings of $2 trillion over 10 years. There's little ways that we can basically look at growing our way out of this. And I think that's the way to look at this. We're increasing our defense spending by $100 billion. That's important for us to be able to ensure that the Indo-PACOM fight is going to basically be prepared and ready, that our military and our war fighters are going to have what they need to be successful, that we can give them a better quality of life, not just for the actual service member, but for their spouses as well. So there's certain things in there which is necessary to an increase. But again, we have to grow our way out of this. It's not just the fact that D.C. has a spending problem, which they do, and we do need to cut the waste, fraud, and abuse, but we have to have economic growth strategy. It has to be energy-based. So again, as the president used to say, drill, baby, drill. We can offset this through the true global currency, which is energy.
If I could switch to foreign policy, because I know you were just recently in Syria, and the president surprised a lot of people by announcing in his visit to the Gulf region last week that he would be lifting all sanctions on Syria and meeting with the interim president there, al-Sharaa, the first face-to-face meeting between a U.S. president and a Syrian leader in some 25 years. And I want to counter that with some of the assessments now and testimony we're hearing from Secretary of State Rubio, who said that it is the State Department's assessment that this transitional authority, given the challenges they are facing, are maybe weeks, months away from potential collapse and a full-scale civil war. So, A, do you support lifting all sanctions at this point, and how concerned are you about those statements from the Secretary of State?
Well, look, I was the first member of Congress to travel over to Syria after the fall of the regime. And I can tell you, having met with al-Sharaa, having met with the Foreign Minister al-Shabani, the telecommunications ministers in his cabinet, that there is an actual strategy to move forward. And there is a historic chance for President Trump. I mean, this is a Nobel Peace Prize in itself if you look at what could occur if we can actually stop the 50-plus year reign of Russia being the preferred vendor and the preferred partner. This allows us to guarantee that Iran does not turn Syria into a proxy state as they've been pushed out. This allows us to continue to look at what al-Sharaa is doing, working with Iraq CTS and the Americans to help combat ISIS. But also, al-Sharaa is helping the Israelis by preventing proxy militias like Hashd al-Shaabi out of Iraq from using Syria as a transportation hub into Lebanon of weapons to be able to use for counterattacks. And so there's a lot that's going on. And as I talked to President al-Sharaa, there is a transition from the battlefield to governance, and he needs to be focused on things that are like municipalities, water, sewage, trash, helping to rebuild infrastructure, helping to ensure that the telecommunication ministry can change out the Iranian emplaced data capabilities. And so these are all steps for us to build trade and economic partnerships. But again, Syria cannot build if they're under these strict sanctions, and we must give it a chance to survive and thrive as they want to actually join the Abraham Accords or to help expand out the ability to support allies on the borders with Israel. They want to have good economic trade with the West. They want their ports to be able to be thriving once again. They've already pushed Russia out of the port of Tartus, as you know, or in the process. They want to have a peace agreement with the SDF, and they want to address the foreign fighters that's been there for 6, 7, and 8 years. There's a lot that we discussed in my private meeting with al-Sharaa for about an hour and a half in the old Assad Palace, but also with Shabani, where we put together our notepads and wrote down what needs to happen to see a free, democratically elected Syria that has plurality and has inclusiveness. And you see that in his cabinet with the Minister of Special Programs, who is a Christian woman who I spoke with and said, I have full rules, responsibilities, and authorization. This is not window dressing. And so we're seeing where he's putting his money where his mouth is. I think that we have to take the chance to give them the opportunity to go forward and build an Arab coalition that leads to Middle East stability.
That is so fascinating to hear about your hour-and-a-half meeting with al-Sharaa, especially knowing that the president just spent about 30 minutes of time with him last week. So we'll have to have you back on to delve deeper into this important subject.